Thank you to our patrons and today's sponsor Skillshare for making this video possible. Little did I know when I made a video on the rise and fall of America's Next Top Model that video would catapult me to stardom. Many of you know and love my ANTM video, and it turns out so does Netflix. Because who pops up 2 minutes in to Netflix's new ANTM documentary but yours truly? Look at how these people were treated. It raises a lot of concerns around exploitation. I was as shocked as you are. There was no contact, no permission, no credit, and no compensation, which is interesting to me because whenever I use Netflix clips, I have to be very careful in order to avoid copyright claims, even though they're fair use. They decided to just pluck my video off my channel and throw it into their documentary. What's more infuriating than Netflix using me without permission in their documentary is Netflix using me without permission in a bad documentary. Reality Check Inside America's Next Top Model leaves a lot to be desired. And as a resident ANTM expert here on YouTube, I feel it is my divine duty to review and analyze it for you all. On a filmmaking level, I felt like this documentary lacked a clear message and narrator. It felt like a jumble of interviews kind of strung together, punctuated by these random snappy montages of ANTM themed TikToks. Reality Check lures you in initially with a montage of ANTM's highs and lows and the reactions they provoke. There's outrage at the body shaming, racism, sexism, humiliation, and danger the contestants faced. After years of TikToks, think pieces, and video essays criticizing Tyra, it is time to hear from the woman herself.
I haven't really said much, but now it's time.
Reality Check is framed as, finally, the people behind ANTM are going to be held accountable and the wronged will have their say. And that's true to a certain extent. There's a lot of attention on Tyra's failure to take accountability, but I think the problem with the documentary is bigger than that. It airs a lot of common defenses we've heard about ANTM without pushing back on them enough. And while it tells the traumatizing stories of former contestants, I don't think that it effectively contextualized them in the the widespread unethical practices that were common to not just ANTM, but reality TV in general. The documentary seems most interested in painting Tyra as a villain in a salacious expose. So naturally, the aim of this video is to fill some of the gaps I found in the documentary. I want to put ANTM on trial and break down its defenses one by one, cross-examine the witnesses, including Tyra and her partners in crime, Ken Mock, Nigel Barker, Mr. J, and Ms. J. I want to talk about how the reality TV production made ANTM's crimes possible. During the most viral moment of top model history, Tyra Banks says, "Learn something from this." And in this video, I decided to heed her advice. This video is sponsored by Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning platform that lets you learn at your own pace whenever you want. The classes are taught by real people, and you're sure to see some familiar faces, whether it be your favorite vlogger or industry professionals. The classes range from broad overviews to niche tutorials, so you can acquaint yourself with Procreate or fine-tune your fountain pen penmanship. Back when I started YouTube, I used a Skillshare course to learn editing, and now I am a Premiere Pro. I've used Adobe After Effects a few times for specific edits, but never quite took the time to fully acquaint myself. So naturally, I did the course Get Started with Adobe After Effects 2026 for beginners. The lessons were split up according to specific skills, and I think other times I tried to learn After Effects, I got overwhelmed by these hour and a half, 2 hour long tutorials that promised to teach me everything I needed to know. So these shorter, more specific lessons were perfect for me. I've heard so much about personal curricula and going analog in 2026. So if you're looking to reconnect with your creativity, pick up a new hobby, or just get off your phone, Skillshare is a great way to do it. The first 500 people to click the link in the description or scan the QR code will get a month free trial of Skillshare. Thank you, Skillshare, for making this video possible. Defense number 1. It was a different time. Variations include things were different back then. It was the early 2000s. We would/could never do something like that nowadays. Episode 1 of Reality Check has a clear-cut, albeit formulaic structure. It charts ANTM's conception and stuttering start. We get early 2000s context, a background on Tyra, and in this section there's nothing that we haven't seen before. It's common to every other documentary, podcast, and video essay on ANTM, mine included. The documentary's opening addresses the motivation behind an ANTM retrospective, which is its COVID era, resurgence, and backlash. In the 8 years since ANTM ended, it's only been 8 years, which is crazy to think about, coverage of it has been overwhelmingly negative. The criticism often has this sense of like, how did we let this happen? Or how was this allowed? And Reality Check offers the answer: it was a different time.
It was such a different time. Early 2000s.
This is 25 years ago. Like, we were different back then.
We can't take our modern woke values and retroactively apply them to this old show. God knows that I have seen countless comments parroting this excuse in the comments of my own video. Tyra Banks, Ken Mock, and the other judges suggest that the backlash is the result of a new generation finding ANTM, Gen Z, and hating what they found. There's definitely a grain of truth there, but I don't think it's so simple. I'm on the tail end of Gen Z. I'm 27, and I grew up watching ANTM from when I was about 11 to when it ended when I was 19. Some people call me a hypocrite on my last video for having watched and loved ANTM as a teenager. Just want to reiterate that I was a teenager. Even if I weren't a teenager, we are allowed to change our opinions. We are allowed to critically reflect on the media that we consumed or loved. In fact, I would encourage it. I agree that a COVID era rewatch shocked people, but I take issue with the notion that Gen Z are unique in their outrage. I think the ANTM resurgence/retrospective may feel like this onslaught of never before voiced opinions. But what's new isn't the opinions, but it's like the access. It's how they are delivered. The show aired from 2002 to 2018. For a good chunk of that, we didn't have a centralized popular social media for people to congregate and discuss the show or voice their grievances. I don't believe ANTM aired without criticism, because it didn't. As early as 2006, an article called "Is Tyra Banks Racist?" by J.E. Dahl dissected Tyra's mistreatment of Black women on the show. Dahl describes her trying to, quote, eradicate ethnic idiosyncrasies in their personality and appearance. The book Reality Bites Back: The Troubling Truth About Guilty Pleasure TV by Jennifer L. Posner was published in 2010. This book is very critical of ANTM. Posner highlights the mistreatment of contestants because of their race, weight, gender, etc., and I'll be referencing it a couple times throughout this video. And then we have this New York Times article from 2015, ANTM Deconstructed, which calls the show a, quote, dehumanizing era of reality TV, a histrionic competition that showcased the most base emotions: jealousy, antagonism, and insecurity. It highlights criticism from over the years, people, quote, pointing out that the show never actually produced any supermodels and criticizing its propagation of model cliches. This is a very small sample size, just from a few years apart, but I wanted to point out how the backlash was there the entire time. ANTM was being called out for its mistreatment of its contestants in real time. That may have intensified in recent years, but it's not new. But by pretending that everything was fine back then, no one had any issues when it was airing, attitudes only just changed because of this new woke generation, production was justified to continue for 24 cycles and not change anything about their behavior. Everyone can sit back and pretend that they just didn't know any better. Also, the show aired from 2002 to 2018, as I said. Most of its run was not the early 2000s, and the show got crazier as it went on, which is closer to our modern time now. A lot of ANTM's lowest moments, which we will get into, aren't the result of a lack of wokeness or social awareness. They are a lack of basic human respect for the contestants. And maybe you'll disagree, but I feel like the early 2000s aren't as far away as we like to think they are. Diet culture has been repackaged as wellness culture. High protein is the new low fat, and Strong slash healthy is the new thin. Thinness is still very much in fashion. And the US also invaded a new oil territory this year. So the early 2000s aren't that far away. Defense number 2, the realistic myth. Who here thinks that ANTM was a realistic glimpse into the fashion industry? I do think the first season, and only the first season, follows through on the intention of tutoring models, but it's not long before the show abandons any attempt to make a realistic modeling show. We saw models walking down the sides of buildings, falling over on various unsafe runways, doing rap battles, riding horses. The contestants were not trained for the real world of modeling. This was an entertainment show. ANTM was not making models, and very few ANTM contestants or winners had successful modeling careers after the show. In the documentary and elsewhere, former contestants say that ANTM was actually a hindrance to their modeling career.
Some girls who got bad edits had a really hard time signing with agencies, or even if they got with an agency, the clients weren't interested in working with them.
The show's extravagant, occasionally dangerous shoots and runways are purely for drama. They are not for learning. They are not teaching the models any skills. Their post-show portfolios with the very extravagant and retouched photos were not suitable for castings.
A model's call sheet or lookbooks are natural and raw, very quiet moments. That would work on television.
Winnie Harlow is probably the most successful model to come out of ANTM, and she doesn't think it did anything for her career.
So I really started after the show because that really didn't do anything for my career. Which it doesn't do anything for any model's career, realistically.
Ken Mock says in this documentary,
there was a stigma to being part of a reality series.
Danny Evans, the winner of Cycle 6, recounts her difficulties finding work. She lived with models signed to the same agency, and they would get far more jobs than her, and one day it was confirmed that that was because of Top Model. Tyra was aware of this stigma.
What angers me the most is the conversation that Tyra had with me years later. She's like, I knew that there were certain doors that you couldn't even get into because you did Top Model, and I did nothing about it.
Everyone knew ANTM was not going for realism. But when does this defense of we were just portraying a realistic modeling industry come up? Almost exclusively in response to body shaming, misogyny, and racism. ANTM just uses realism as an excuse to shame and humiliate contestants. In Reality Check, Tyra begins by comparing America's Next Top Model to American Idol, but then she ends up comparing it to Fear Factor and Survivor, which I think is very telling in how her psychology shifted from this competition show to a survival show. Defense number 3. ANTM challenged the beauty standard. Tyra was a pioneer of diversity. A sentiment widely repeated in the documentary is Tyra set out to challenge the fashion industry's definition of beauty.
When we were casting, we got a lot of pushback from the network. If you had one person of a different color, that was their definition of diverse. That was not my definition or Tyra's definition of diversity.
Tyra did fight for a diverse cast of contestants, but the noble aim of challenging the beauty standard was very quickly lost. Top Model reinforced beauty standards at every turn, and before you rush to the defense that it was realistic, I urge you to take a look back at section 2. Nevertheless, Tyra continues to paint herself as some kind of savior and rebel. Tyra and Ken Mock's alleged aim to showcase various forms of beauty rings hollow when we look at how they treated unconventional models. Representation on ANTM often went hand in hand with exploitation and humiliation. The contestants cast to challenge beauty standards suffered as a result of their very differences. Black women were often mistreated and stripped of their markers of blackness, all in the name of making them more marketable. Many Black women had their natural hair chemically straightened or covered with weaves. Many of them were criticized for being ghetto. Again, ANTM was not going for realism. This was not actually doing anything for their careers. Tyra was not interested in making these models marketable. It only reinforced the message that Black is not beautiful nor marketable.
Do you really think you can have a CoverGirl contract with a gap in your mouth?
Yeah, why not?
This is all people see. It's easy to reach beautiful CoverGirl. It's not marketable.
Tyra's treatment of women of color on the show undercuts her defense of the race swapping photo shoot.
If this was my way of showing the world that brown and black is beautiful.
But why not just do that by casting women of color and treating them as beautiful? Ebony Haith of Cycle 1 features in Reality Check, and she discusses how hurt and disappointed she was with the way that she was represented.
I knew people would be against anything that I represent, being a black woman that's gay or whatever it is, but I did think that I would be protected.
Ebony went onto the show with a near shaved head, and her makeover was to shave the rest of it off, but her haircut was humiliating for her. The stylists mocked her hair. They didn't cut it correctly.
Everybody basically said they didn't know what to do. So you think a little tough? I didn't like the way the woman was cutting my hair, the way they went conversation in front of me.
Should we write her name?
Yeah.
It is uneven.
And bragging about having black women on your show, but failing to accommodate their hair, feels like the pinnacle of hollow representation. Not to mention that instead of an apology from Tyra for her butchered haircut, she was scolded for looking ashy. Haith was also repeatedly labeled harsh, angry, aggressive, hard to work with.
She's very aggressive and very angry.
Ebony just is much too harsh for me. When you come into the room, we sense a chip on your shoulder, a type of anger that makes you push yourself too hard.
All racially loaded criticism that painted her as the angry black woman. Ebony's queerness was brought up in her casting interview, and she came out on TV.
That's kind of how the world found out I was gay, and how the world met me. I hoped at least they would pull me to the side and say, how do you want to approach this? You know, they forgot the danger of that.
To really hammer home that Ebony's mistreatment was not just a product of its time, Ebony said in an interview with Newsbeat, plenty of people at the time were shocked by her treatment. The fact that an American show decided to take a black girl from New York named Ebony and to tell the world her skin texture was too rough, she says. It was amazing how many people were embarrassed at the way I was treated on the show. Isis was the first transgender contestant in Cycle 11, and this is often cited as a hallmark in trans representation, which it is, in some ways. Isis was the first openly trans person that a lot of people saw on TV, myself included. But Isis was not treated well on the show precisely because she was trans. Some of the cast were openly transphobic, and production prohibited a medic from administering her hormones, so she had to self-administer, which was filmed. You can't point to these huge steps in representation as a positive for ANTM without examining how those represented minorities were treated. As much as ANTM production likes to pat itself on the back for representing plus-size models were always told to lose weight on the show, and their storylines almost always revolved around their weight. Sometimes they were humiliated because wardrobe didn't get garments that fit them.
You can't find something in my size, so I'm supposed to feel bad because you're taking everything as a negative. I don't think that you realize how this whole modeling thing works.
And body shaming is just inherent to every cycle of ANTM.
If you're sporting a gut, then you turn to the side and disguise it.
I would love to change the rules, but until that happens, I think it's all about choices, Kenya. You can get a burger and take the bread off.
Only one out of 24 winners, Whitney Thompson, was a plus-size model, and Thompson revealed in Reality Check that her winning contract was under an agency that had no plus-size division, Elite Model Management. Despite airing a petite cycle where all of the models were under 5'7", which is not a very realistic standard for the industry, ANTM never ran a plus-size cycle. Sarah Hartshorn, a Cycle 9 contestant, wrote a memoir about her time on Top Model called You Want to Be on Top, and she details how the producers and the judges would bring up her weight constantly.
Producers of the show would ask me about my body all the time, and they would ask me how I felt about it and how I felt about the fact that it was different than the other girls. How do I, steel myself to let this be the thing that we talk about in every interview?
After every challenge and photo shoot, producers would ask her if she were insecure for being the biggest girl on set, or if any time she did poorly, was it because of her weight?
And they asked if I felt like a man. You know, was I afraid that being a plus-size model with short hair would make me look fatter?
They would rush to film her doing yoga and exercise so they could edit this into some kind of weight narrative. She was ultimately eliminated after the judges said that she was disappearing before their eyes, though she said the number on the scale never changed. We see a clip of London Levi from Cycle 12 in Reality Check, though she's not featured in the documentary, and Mr. J scolded London on set, who was an 18-year-old in recovery from an eating disorder, for gaining weight.
She gained a lot of weight. It just really shocked me today. I'm seeing such a huge change physically.
As much as J. Manuel likes to act that he had no part in the degradation of models on ANTM, he was participating in a lot of the same behaviors as Tyra and everybody else. London's storyline was all about her weight. Producers knew that she was in recovery from an eating disorder because all contestants are required to do psychological evaluations as a part of their casting, and they still subjected her to this trauma and torture.
I hate and preach about models not having to be stick skinny. We have to face it that we are in the fashion industry.
This was not to prepare models for the real world. It is blatantly obvious that the realistic elements of the show were cherry-picked to include body shaming, racism, and misogyny, and not much else. This is just a teeny tiny sample size of the hollow and damaging representation in ANTM. I went into a lot more detail in my other video, but I didn't want to have too much repetition here. I just wanted to highlight a couple examples to push back on the notion that ANTM was this champion of representation. And Louis Staples puts it well in an article for The Cut. Banks wants credit for inventing a show to fight against the fashion industry, but what she was actually doing was teaching the girls how to thrive within an oppressive system, like she did. That's a different thing altogether. The ethics of reality TV. Jennifer L. Posner writes, "When Hollywood pushes the limits, it's usually bad news for women. That has been increasingly true with reality TV, our most vivid example of a pop cultural backlash against women's rights and social progress. The disrespect, humiliation, and degradation of young women is central to ANTM." The documentary details a few harrowing stories of mistreatment and outright abuse, and I applaud these women who bravely come forward to tell their stories. Unfortunately, I don't think that Reality Check did enough to effectively situate these incidents within the wider context of reality TV production. These women's experiences were only possible because of the lack of care and respect common to reality TV. So we'll talk about some experiences highlighted in the documentary, but also all the neglect and manipulation playing out in the background to every cycle of ANTM. Of course, this, along with everything else, is alleged. Everything is alleged. I was not there. I was not on set. I never met Tyra. Huge trigger warning for sexual assault for this section. Shandy Sullivan was a contestant on cycle 2. And when the contestants went to Milan, one night some men that were involved in a challenge, I think, went back to the model apartment to party. Shandy estimates that she drank about 2 bottles of wine on effectively an empty stomach and very little sleep. She kissed one guy and then things escalated. And Shandy doesn't remember much of the night. Neither Shandy nor anyone else describes what happened as sexual assault, but it was very clear that Shandy was too drunk to consent. She describes being aware that sex was happening without really feeling it. And all of this was filmed. Nobody stepped in to stop things. Ken Mock's excuse?
We treated Top Model as a documentary.
This is just absolute bullshit. ANTM was not a fly-on-the-wall documentary about some models. It was a construction, and the women had no control over their schedule.
The girls could not dictate the next 5 minutes of their lives.
Not only did production allow her assault, allegedly, and film it, but they framed it as a cheating scandal. The episode is called The Girl Who Cheated, and after Shandy's assaulted, Tyra has this big sister chat with the girls and talks about cheating. Then they filmed Shandy on the phone, telling her boyfriend what happened. Ken Mock says they significantly edited down the footage that they shot. The reason behind that? Janet Jackson's nip slip at the Super Bowl. This was not a moral reckoning, a recognition that they did something wrong. They did not care. And I think that they still don't care. Ken Mock described the incident as an orgy on the E! True Hollywood Story documentary.
It turned into an orgy.
And then in Reality Check, he says,
For good or bad, one of the most memorable moments in Top Model.
For good or bad? A woman was raped, Ken, on your show, and you profited off of it. Tyra shrugs off the whole incident. She says that production wasn't her area, despite years of evidence pointing to the exact contrary, of her talking about how involved in every aspect of the show she is, how she's in the editing room, crafting storylines. Also, she is an executive producer.
Remember the story with Shandy? I do remember her story. It's a little difficult for me to talk about production because that's not my territory. I'm not head of story, that's Ken Mock, but I did become a master editor.
She pretends to barely recall Shandy's story when prompted, which is just ridiculous, and Tyra brought her on her show. Not only did they allow Shandy's trauma, but they re-traumatized her in its wake. I didn't love how Reality Check told Shandy's story. It's first set up as this kind of cliffhanger at the end of episode 1.
More difficult territory is Shandy.
Shandy, okay.
You remember the story with Shandy?
And then episode 2 shows clips from the ANTM episode of Shandy's assault, essentially, and also shows her saying that she never wants to see the footage ever again. Maybe the filmmakers had Shandy's permission to use the clips. It would have been helpful if they had said that, but if they didn't, it feels like they too are sensationalizing the story. Like I said, I think Reality Check's scope overall is far too narrow. It shows how bad things got, but not the toxic environment that was foundational to ANTM, one that affected all of the contestants, even if that was in varying degrees. The podcast Curse of America's Next Top Model by Bridget Armstrong documents ANTM's unethical practices, and I highly, highly recommend it. I think it is far superior to Reality Check, and I think it's the best coverage of ANTM that we've gotten so far. It is fantastic. It is very comprehensive and well researched. It features several interviews of different contestants, and I believe the same team are working on an ANTM documentary for E that comes out the 11th of March, and I'll be interested to see what that's like. A lot of the information in the following section comes from Curse of and Sarah Hartshorn's memoir. Sorry, it's a bit of a tongue twister, where she goes into a lot of detail of the everyday life of the contestants. Contestants have alleged several damning facts. In the contracts, they signed their life rights away, and anyone who wanted to talk to them on the phone had to also sign their life rights away. They had to sign NDAs, for which the penalty was $5 million, and they were warned that not only would they become bankrupt if they broke an NDA, but so would their children and their children's children. Producers weaponized information from psych evals to manipulate contestants, goading them in interviews with questions about their trauma.
Anytime you see me crying on the phone, it's because they asked me, do you feel the same way like you did when your mom told you to kill yourself?
I think I was in an interview room for almost 7 hours, by myself with 3 people just like this. But I had the interviewer telling me, I was begging her to stop asking me questions about being suicidal.
And constructing shoots around their phobias and fears. And this last part isn't even alleged. One of the producers, Andrew Peterson, openly admitted this.
Or there might be someone who's scared of spiders. So we add those elements of fear into the photo shoot to create story.
The documentary highlights one example of this, which was with Dion, who had to pose in this weird shoot where all of the models were killed by other models. And for Dion, she had to pose as if she had been shot in the head. Her mom had been shot and was paralyzed from the waist down.
They knew about it from the application process, but they still chose to have me do this particular photo shoot. I think they wanted to see some type of mental breakdown or, to see me crumble.
In the British invasion cycle, several of the contestants had a fear of heights. That cycle, the contestants had to pose on the world's highest bungee jump at the Macau Tower, and they did that pretty much in the middle of a storm.
Ask her to pose without holding onto the cable, please.
Want to try some without holding it?
I can't. I'm sorry.
Okay, it's okay.
In the Curse of podcast, the winner of that cycle, Sophie Sumner, reveals that the tower would have been closed to the public, and these models were forced to pose out there with just a harness attached to them. That is not the only time the model's safety was at risk. There were several other shoots and challenges where models were dangling from heights or, like I said, walking down the sides of buildings. Many models also got injured or sick on the show, and Ken Mock said in an interview,
The biggest disaster ever is always the best thing. People have 104-degree temperature, they're throwing up, they need IVs. That's the best news I could ever have.
They didn't care about the model's safety on any level, physical, emotional, anything. And even if they did get sick or injured, there was nothing to excuse not delivering at panel. The lack of concern wasn't just visible in these extreme examples of photo shoots and challenges. A disregard for contestants was fundamental to the show. Reality TV as a genre is very cheap to produce. Why? Because many of the people involved don't get paid. Emily Nussbaum, author of Cue the Sun, The Invention of Reality TV, calls reality shows the slimy beneficiaries of anti-labor tactics funded by executives who didn't want to pay writers and actors. Reality contestants rarely get a living wage despite working around the clock.
It was unpaid labor. We worked until 3, 4 in the morning. We were being subject to a new world of entertainment that was cheap.
According to Cycle 24's Gina Turner, their per diem started at $12. A lot of other contestants said that they got around $30 to $40 a day. They have to pay for their food out of their own pocket, and Sarah Hartshorn said that she could barely afford to feed herself while on the show. Also, according to Hartshorn, after the contestant Ebony Morgan quit the show, she spent 2 months effectively locked in a hotel room. She wasn't allowed to go home or talk to her family. Angeli Preston of Cycle 15 and 17 said that they worked hours with no food.
There are times when we didn't get fed. We had to film straight through 15, 18 hours without eating. So we're starving. So then that plays on your mental attitude, because it's almost like they want us to go in there angry so they can have drama. So, okay, let's starve them. Let's withhold food. Let's withhold water, because you know how you get when you're hungry.
Hartshorn said that contestants often fainted at panel because they were working on little food, little sleep, and forced to stand for 7 to 8 hours in high heels on a hot set. They're mistreated on and off camera, allegedly, with manipulation tactics primed to make them volatile and exhausted, i.e. to make good TV. People love to dismiss this trauma and exploitation as they knew what they were signing up for. But did they? The information about ANTM's toxic work environment has only really come to light since NDAs expired, and the show took advantage of the aspirations of very young women, sometimes teenagers, by selling them this dream. And contestants were signing up for a reality TV show competition, not hours of alleged abuse, starvation, psychological torture, and manipulation. So many contestants came from poverty or rough backgrounds, and ANTM was dangling a ticket for a way out. If you still think it's not that deep, or this is too much of a woke lens, or whatever, I encourage you to reflect on what cost is too high to entertain you. Who or what is worth getting sacrificed for your entertainment? I think people dismiss stories of reality TV exploitation with this idea that people subject themselves to this treatment, that they have some kind of agency or that they deserve what they get. But reality TV, like anything else, is a workplace. Being on reality TV, you are on a set, and that should come with all of the safeguards and protocols that come with being on a TV or film or ad set. Just because you are on a reality TV show doesn't mean that you deserve to be treated as less than human, as a character, as a plot device. And also, there's maybe a notion that people could leave whenever they want. Like I said, Ebony Morgan of Cycle 9 tried to quit, and she was kept in a hotel room for 2 months for confidentiality reasons, and this is not unique. Many of the women were kept for weeks or months in a hotel room with their food delivered, not allowed to access hotel facilities or leave their room, not allowed a phone or to talk to anybody from the outside world. Hartshorn writes, "They took our phones and watches, and they prohibited newspapers, televisions, clocks, or anything that told us what day or time it was. They removed all our agency and kept us on edge by withholding food, sleep, and access to bathrooms. That was another thing that the contestants would have to ask to go to the bathroom, and sometimes they were told no. And we all remember how hard COVID isolation was, so let's imagine that for a moment.
What happened is you were filmed packing your bag, exiting the model apartment, and then a production assistant took you to a hotel room.
There wasn't a phone available to call anybody at that time.
Tears, fights, and emotional breakdowns play out on camera just like Tyra Banks' misdeeds. But what we never saw were the other producers inflicting damage behind the scenes. Tyra Banks was an executive producer, but she was not the only guilty party. And she is the most visible on the show, in the documentary, and in the press coverage. So much of which has focused on Tyra's lack of accountability, Tyra's actions, and the harm that Tyra has done. Not just the show or reality TV in general. And the focus on Tyra makes me wonder if people truly care about changing reality TV production, or if we just want this one woman to fall. The Tyra problem. The documentary ushered in a fresh wave of criticism towards Tyra Banks. The supermodel turned TV personality, turned ice cream entrepreneur.
The legacy, the real legacy, I want it to be ice cream. I really do.
Much of the reception focuses on Tyra's lack of accountability. She may look in the camera at the end of reality check and say, hold me accountable, call me out my shit, but this is after 2 hours of ducking and dodging responsibility. The documentary and ensuing press coverage have painted Tyra Banks not just as this immoral executive producer and TV host, but as a bad person. I'm not here to dispute Tyra's damaging actions or lack of real accountability. I do, however, like the other sections, wish to broaden the scope of blame to include other ANTM producers. Because I wonder if Tyra Banks has become like the bad apple, the sole person responsible for malpractices common to the industry. Little Conversation focuses on the fellow executive producer Ken Mock, or the network executives, or the scorned trio themselves, JJ and Nigel. Though the latter may have wielded less power, they too engaged in victim blaming, body shaming, racism, misogyny, the list goes on. By pointing the finger at Tyra, they seem to absolve themselves of sin. Too much of the documentary is spent detailing how Tyra was a bad friend, not a bad producer or co-worker, but friend. Jay Manuel recounts his feelings of betrayal after Tyra iced him out when he tried to quit. Jay Alexander reveals that he had a stroke, was in a coma, and is actively recovering. This emotional segment culminates in the revelation that Tyra has never visited him.
She just sent me a text that she wants to come and visit me. But no, not yet.
Media outlets wasted no time in globbing onto this detail as evidence of Tyra's inhumanity. Jay Manuel, Jay Alexander, and Nigel Barker have taken to interviews to tut at Tyra's lack of accountability and dish that no, Tyra has still not visited Miss J post-stroke. Barker, Jay Manuel, and Jay Alexander act as if they've owned up to everything. They've reflected and they've grown.
What should Tyra do?
How we approached it is just to be absolutely honest with it.
Anyone who's watched the show knows that they engaged in the very same behaviors as Tyra. Sure, they weren't executive producers, but they weren't innocent bystanders either.
Tell me that this is the guy that said that he didn't want to kiss a black girl?
He doesn't like black girls.
Oh.
He told me that to me the night before, and I feel like he's crawling in his skin just to kiss me.
Bottom line is you've got to take control. It's not about him. He's just an extra.
That should not have stopped her from doing the job that she was sent there to do.
Trigger warning for sexual harassment for the next couple of minutes. Kenya Hill takes to the documentary to recount her story of sexual harassment. While on a photo shoot, a male model gropes her and starts grinding on her. She stops the shoot to voice her discomfort, and Mr. J completely dismisses her and is basically like, why are you holding up this photo shoot? Time is money.
We're here in a professional situation. There are like 50 of us sitting here on set.
Right. In reality check, Nigel Barker grimaces at his past self chiding Kenya for not powering through this sexual harassment.
That's the good way. You can handle it. You have to be able to be in control.
but that didn't prevent him from doubling down.
The reality of the world, unfortunately, in the fashion industry, there's always been a lot of issues with, sort of harassment in every sort of shape or way, whether you're a male model or a female model, actually.
The realistic defense, yet again. Barker fails to recognize that ANTM had a duty of care to its contestants, a responsibility to provide a safe working environment, which they so often fail to do so.
To be on a TV set in front of so many people and still not be protected is some pretty dark stuff.
This is not a personal failing of Tyra Banks. It is a failure of production, which is a fact that the documentary makers themselves seem to forget. I just want to reemphasize that this is not a defense of Tyra Banks. She has inflicted immeasurable harm on screen and off. I don't blame people, contestants and viewers alike, for demanding accountability from Tyra, from someone that they trusted and admired and watched for years. I'm not trying to absolve Tyra of blame, but redistribute the disproportionate amount of vitriol that she's getting. The easy thing to do would be to shake our heads at Tyra and just close the chapter on ANTM as something that happened in the past. But to do so would ignore the malpractice that plays out in the background of so much reality TV. Reality Check implicitly shrugs off Tyra's apologies and calls for accountability through their editing.
I want you guys to be just as open as I am now about getting called on my shit for when somebody calls you out on yours.
Girl, that is absolutely ridiculous.
This soundbite of Danny Evans is from her talking about Tyra closing her gap and widening another model's. All of this is to say that Tyra was a problem, but the problem was not just Tyra. In my opinion, Reality Check failed to push back on the crew's excuses and allowed the other judges to paint themselves as the good guys, because the documentary platformed their voices, more specifically their criticisms and beef with Tyra. I think the documentary would have benefited enormously from having more outside voices. They do interview the journalist Zakiya, I'm not sure, Gibbons, who brought an outside perspective and was very critical of the show. But everybody else featured was involved in the show in some capacity. It would have been helpful to see someone like an eating disorder specialist discuss media impact and responsibility instead of relying on anecdotes from former contestants. I would have loved to see an expert on reality TV to contextualize ANTM in reality TV production. I also just found it so frustrating that they used so many reaction clips without permission, instead of paying more people to come and talk about the show. I think the filmmakers could and should have done better. The fact that they end the documentary with this kind of teaser for Cycle 25.
You have no idea what we have planned for Cycle 25.
Made a lot of people say that they feel like this documentary was like a promo for the next ANTM cycle, and interest in Cycle 25 has peaked because of the documentary. That's not all that I have to say on the documentary, but I think I've made my point. Thank you very much for watching. Also, thank you to everyone who messaged me that I was in the documentary. If you'd like to support me more, you can check out the Patreon. I would also love to hear your thoughts and opinions on ANTM, on the documentary, the press coverage, Tyra, all that stuff. For patrons, I will see you in my February Media Roundup video. And for everyone else, I will see you in my next video. Thank you. Bye. Special shout out to Kelly T, Paula Boone, Icarus Moore, Mina Floyd, Eric Danielson, Cecilia Diarval, and my Sharpay Evans tier patrons.